One of the Bryan Kohberger defense experts, someone who worked for the Bryan Kohberger defense team when they were getting ready for the trial, when they thought there would be a trial. And his name is Cy Ray. He was an expert on the cell phone data, among other things. And he's going to drop two bombshells in this episode, and he's going to explain why he believes these things. First of all, based on the cell phone data, he believes that Bryan Kohberger was inside the house at 1122 King Road, the house where Kaylee, Xana, Maddie, and Ethan lived, that he was inside the house and possibly inside the living room before the murders, like on other days, that he had been in that house before.
A defense expert hired by Bryan Kohberger's own team says the evidence shows something the prosecution never wanted you to hear. Not about the night of the murders, about the months before, about a Samsung phone that kept showing up in the same place, about a living room he allegedly visited before anyone knew his name, and about an FBI investigation that, according to this insider, was so flawed that even the defense expert believes Kohberger is guilty. Imagine a map, a digital map, with little blinking dots representing phones moving through Moscow, Idaho. You watch them for 6 months. You see patterns emerge. You see one phone, a Samsung, pinging in certain locations. You see another phone, an iPhone, showing up in those same spots. You see them converge. You see them separate. And then you see the Samsung phone at 1122 King Road. Not on the night of the murders, on other nights in the living room. That is the visual anchor you have to hold in your mind.
A man who was allegedly in the house before he ever entered it with a knife? Before we go deeper into what the evidence actually shows, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Nest Media, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the facts. The source is Cy, a former homicide sergeant and cell phone data expert hired by the Kohberger defense team. He worked on the case when they thought there would be a trial. He analyzed the AT&T location data, he examined the mobile advertiser IDs, and he concluded that Bryan Kohberger's phone had been inside or very close to the King Road residence on multiple occasions before the 13th of November, 2022. He says there are 5 precise GPS hits that land directly on the living room.
Particular case, if you look at those precise measurements, there's probably 5 that land directly on what would be the living room of the house. Like the latitude, longitude is the physical house itself. And, you know, if you put the house back on the map and you map those, the hits are
not
inside
the property, not the street, the living room. Here is the moral refrain. Hold it in your mind. The FBI never looked at the data. The FBI never looked at the data. Cy explains that AT&T provides a report called LODOR.
AT&T has a very specific report, and it's called LOCDBOR. And I know it sounds like a silly word. It's LOCDBOR, LOCDBOR, and it's Location Database of Record. This will include estimated latitude and longitudes, and they range from 25 meters out to 3,000, 30,000 meters, so they can get very big. Historically, there's accuracy issues with this report. So if you just take all the data and you throw it on the map and you think that's accurate, you're going to have
the location database of record. But the accuracy varies wildly. One hit showed Kohberger in New Orleans when he was actually in Seattle, so you can't rely on every ping. But when you cross-reference the Samsung phone's precise GPS data with other evidence, a pattern emerges. Cy identified multiple instances where Kohberger's phone tracked to the same locations as the victim's phones.
Correct. And there's movement where they're all in the area of the house before that, and then we see it pop up over by the A&W, but they're together. They're at least mapping, and they're mapping not the exact same lat longs. They're just slightly off, but they're within meters of each other, which is, for me, that's a tall tale sign that we're getting better accuracy, because sometimes the system will default if there's a problem with the system, and everybody will get the same lat long ping for like a 5,000 meter radius. But all of the lat longs are identical. In this case, they're just slightly different. They're just a couple meters apart, and it's a
the
pattern.
A&W root beer stand near the house. A Pullman apartment complex near Kohberger's
The apartment complex right next to Bryan Kohberger's apartment. And at one point, Bryan Kohberger's phone moves over to that apartment complex as well. And that's rare. He doesn't typically hang out in that complex. But this is all the way going back in August, that first weekend after school started, the phones intersect in Pullman.
The King Road house itself? The prosecution's own case allegedly centered on the idea that Kohberger was obsessed with one of the victims. Sy says that victim was Maddie Mogen.
He was going to explain why he believes that Maddie Mogen, was Bryan Kohberger's target. And again, he says that is based on evidence from cell phone data from Bryan Kohberger and also from the victim's cell phones. And he essentially tracked Bryan Kohberger and Maddie Mogen to the same locations several times, he says, before the murders. Again, something I didn't...
He says there were more collisions between Kohberger's phone and Maddie's phone than any of the other victims. They occupied the same space at the same time, multiple times before the murders. But here is where the story turns. Sy says he put all of this in his report. He expected the state to follow up. He expected them to pull the mobile advertiser ID data from third-party databases.
There are third-party databases that collect what is called MAID ID, so mobile advertiser ID. And you guys have all experienced this where you've searched for, I don't know, a pair of shoes. You've Googled a new pair of shoes you think you wanted. And then 2 days later, you're surfing the internet and some ads are popping up for those shoes. That's based on your mobile advertiser ID. It's a unique number, but there's third-party databases that collect that. And typically when they're collecting that type of information, it gets a latitude, longitude stamp with a timestamp. So we can actually see. Law enforcement can access.
Which would have given them precise GPS coordinates. He expected them to map out Kohberger's pattern of life for 6 months, showing where he went, what he did, how long he stayed. He expected them to see what he saw. They never did.
The idea that I put this in my report and said, this is the kind of follow-up I would expect to have, and nobody ever, I fully expected, as soon as I dropped that report that January, that by February, March, we were going to see discovery on this new data. They didn't even look at it. They didn't even bother with it. It's incredible.
They never looked at the data. They never followed up. This is the ticking clock moment. What if the state had analyzed the phone data properly? What if they had connected the dots between Kohberger's phone and the victim's phones before the trial? And here is the rhetorical question that reframes this entire story as a thriller, not just a headline. What do you do in the months before you commit a crime when nobody is watching your phone? The FBI's investigative genetic genealogy, or IGG, is the other bombshell.
I will tell you, the investigative genetic genealogy on this case is overlooked at how impactful it was. As soon as they made the decision to go with investigative genetic genealogy, this case was doomed from an ethical perspective because they had to go outside of policy. They had to hide things. And now once they got the hit, you can see it clear as day. The rest of the investigation is, how do we hide the IGG? Because we don't ever want to.
The IGG process identified Kohberger through a DNA match to his father's profile in a public database. But Sy says the FBI crossed a line.
They would have done that and stopped trying to rely or over-rely on this technology of the IGG produced. I think this is a completely different case. But they crossed a line with IGG. They knew they crossed the line, and everything we see after that is nothing more than smokescreen trying to hide what actually happened to identify him.
They violated their own policies. They used methods that would never hold up in court. And once they realized how impactful the IGG was, the rest of the investigation allegedly became a smokescreen. They had to hide what they did at the beginning, so they stopped investigating, they stopped analyzing phone records, they stopped doing the work because they already had their man. They just couldn't admit how they found him. The irony is devastating. A defense expert hired to challenge the prosecution's case ended up identifying critical evidence that could have strengthened
innocence. I come out with a book. I go around to law enforcement. Ann knows. I told her I was going to go teach law enforcement. I have been very, very clear. I've always thought Bryan Kohberger is guilty. I think in 10 out of 10 courts in America convict this kid. Every single time we go to court, he gets convicted. The question is, does all the evidence come in because of some of the ways that the evidence was managed, which is a whole different conversation. But I am very outspoken that Bryan Kohberger is the guy. Why hasn't Ann issued a letter to me about breaching my
Evidence
NDA
that
or
was
all
never used, evidence that was never even examined, evidence that could have placed Kohberger at the house, in the living room, before the murders. The end result justifies the means, Sai
you said.
says.
The end result justifies the means, right? It doesn't matter how we get to him through IGG because we have all of these bailout plans that we feel we can protect ourselves. Anytime law enforcement takes the idea or the process or the methodology that the end result can justify the means,
That is the problem. Anytime law enforcement takes the idea that the end result justifies the means, we are in trouble. Sai is not alone in his frustration. Steve Gonsalves, the father of victim Kaylee Gonsalves, has been fighting for answers since the beginning.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think it's difficult for people to grasp that we can stand behind his guilt, but not understand or agree with everything that the prosecution.
He tried to hire outside experts to analyze the digital data. They told him it would cost $30,000. The state refused to pay. They refused to do the work. And now, Kohberger is trying to withdraw his guilty plea, arguing ineffective counsel. The case is far from over. The FBI, the state of Idaho, the entire justice system, they had one chance to get this right. And according to the man who analyzed the evidence for the defense, they chose to hide the IGG, ignore the phone data, and build a narrative on speculation instead of
And
science.
that's why we see the phone records were never analyzed because they didn't need the phone records. The phone records for AT&T were nothing more than a smokescreen so that they could say, oh, look, we got this tip, we followed up on the phone, we found this, and oh, that led us over here. The phone records were never gathered as a true investigative tool because they already have the narrative written. And whatever aligned with that narrative because of IGG, they brought in, and anything that contradicted that narrative.
In the end, we are left with the maps, the phone records, the living room pings, the collision points at the A and W, the IGG shortcuts, the unanswered questions. The official record is all there. The testimony, the evidence, the expert reports. The call to research is this. Pull the public filings from the Kohberger case, look for the defense expert reports, read Sai's analysis for yourself. Not the commentary, not the headlines. The actual data. And then ask yourself the direct question. What happens to justice when the people who are supposed to investigate the truth decide they already know the answer? The answer to that question may be the key to everything. The FBI never looked at the data.
I agreed to do this because he wanted to answer their questions. And you'll see, he believes that Bryan Kohberger is guilty, but he has a lot of issues with the way the investigation was handled.
If you appreciate the forensic breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for CrimeNest Media, and share this video, because sometimes the truth doesn't come from the people in power. It comes from the records they release by law, and it is our job to pay attention